Have you ever wanted to design your own font and then sell it on a marketplace like Etsy? Well, at first glance, it can be really intimidating and complicated of a process. But in this video, I'm going to break it down and show exactly how you can do it. It's actually not difficult at all. It's quite a simple process. So I'm going to be talking about how to create the font and then how you can list it for sale on a site like Etsy. Okay, let's jump in. The first question you might wonder is, why should I worry about selling fonts? And when you look at the price point, like this one's $4.68 for handwritten letters, you may think, well, that's not very much money. But when you look at a company like this Baby Crochet Art on Etsy, they've got over 10,000 sales. Now, it's not only this font they're selling. They've just made 10,000 plus sales in general. But it includes things like this font. And if you just do the math on it, let's assume they're doing between $2 and $5 a sale, 10,000 sales, that's between $20,000 and $50,000 for this sort of digital download. The nice thing about a digital download is that if I were to buy this right now, I would get an instant download. I would get a link that I would click on, and then I would get a zip file, and that zip file would contain an SVG file, like a zip file, and then a TTF, which is a true type font file. You could also make an OTF file as well. You may have seen that, and that's an open type format, and it's just a file extension. So you may see TTF and OTF on Etsy. So here we've got SVG and TTF. Here's another one. This is OTF, TTF, SVG, which is your scalable vector file, and EPS, DXF. They've got a whole bunch of different formats. So don't be discouraged if you see this. Again, it can be really intimidating if you see this sort of thing. But what you really want to do when you're doing fonts is at least create one of the following two, OTF or TTF. Those are the two that when somebody downloads a font and they install it on their computer, they can use it in a program like Word. So if you break down a font into its component parts, you've really got capital letters, and then you may have lowercase letters as well. This font, for example, doesn't. They've got capital letters here, and then they've got lowercase letters here, but they look like capital letters. That's one option. Here's another one where we've got cursive fonts, and we can see here we've got capital letters and then small letters next to each other. This drip font, for example, only has capital letters. This is a really nice looking font, but it also has numbers, and then there's special characters. All of these things, these individual components, a letter, a number, a special character, they're called glyphs. And so I'm going to show you now how you can create an individual glyph. And then if you create these glyphs, you just stack them together, and then you can export it all into one zip file, which is a TTF zip file or an OTF zip file. So I think there's three big picture ways to make fonts. Now, you may come up with a fourth way or a fifth way over time, but really I think you can bucket them into these three major categories. The first one is you can just hand draw a font, and you could have a really high-end, iPad and a program and an Apple Pencil and digitally draw them, or you could just use a pencil and a piece of paper. Okay, so I'm in Inkscape right now, and if you've never heard of Inkscape before, it's a completely free vector software tool. You can get it online and download it, and it's completely free. It's great. So if you hand draw your fonts on a piece of paper like what I did, here's an A that I just used a magic marker, and I did some little accoutrements around it, little stink lines. So this is my little stinky A. So if I was going to make a stinky font that's got little smell lines coming off it, here's my A. So I'm starting the process. Now this is just a picture, okay? So I can't do anything with it because it's not a vector, but I can trace the vector in Inkscape. So I'm going to go up to Path, Trace Bitmap. My little trace bitmap window will come out. Now, if you want to see what the little preview looks like, you can click the little update button on the right-hand side, and I can see that looks pretty good. I'm on 45 brightness. I could make the brightness much, much lower. I can click update. And because I'm using a magic marker, like an actual felt tip marker, this isn't really going to affect it a whole lot, but sometimes you might see things like this. You can see the corners of the paper, because the paper is not pure white. It was like a cream white. It's picking up the paper now as dark. So this is too dark. So 68 is way too dark. I'm going to go back down to say 40, do update. That's a nice looking brightness. I'll click apply. Now I can see I've got my actual vector. So I'm going to click on my piece of paper and delete that. And now I've got my vector. Now see how it's way up here? That's because there's a little nubby right there. When I click the Edit Paths by Node, I can see all the nodes, and check that out. There's a node at the top. So you want to make sure when you're tracing a picture that you click on this edit paths by node and then check the size of the marching ants around it. I'm going to simply drag over that little piece because that's a little tiny piece that the computer picked up, and I'm going to click the delete button. When I do that, you'll see it now goes right back down in size. So now this is my vector. I simply double check it, looks good. I could modify it too if I wanted. Let's say one of these lines was a little off kilter. I could adjust it if I wanted just by simply clicking the node. I could also click in between the nodes, and I can make that a little bit easier to work with as well. I can make the curves go. So I'm happy with the way this looks. Overall, that's my A. I simply make sure I've clicked it. I go File, Save As, and then I save it as an Inkscape SVG file, and I have my file name already there. I simply click Save, and I'm good. I've now saved one of many glyphs that I will create. I'll do all of the capital letters, all of the small letters, and then numbers, special characters, that kind of thing. The second one is to use a program like Inkscape and then use existing shapes like circles or rectangles in your drawing of your font. Here's an example of how I can use existing shapes to make a font. So I'm going to create the letter A, but I'm actually not going to use the font icon. I'm going to use this Shapes button. So I'm actually clicking on the left-hand side menu, Create Circles. So I'm going to create a circle here, and I've clicked the little circle button, and now when I drag it, I can make a circle. I can make it exactly a circle by holding down the Control key. That locks in the aspect ratio. So I'm going to use a circle about that size. Now from here, I've got my stroke set down on the bottom left, and it's an outline of red. So I'm just going to click on that and just get rid of it. So if you've ever got a stroke that you don't want anymore, I'm just going to go Stroke Style, and I'll make sure my stroke style is down to 0. And my stroke paint, I'll just make black anyway, but now you can see down at the bottom left, my stroke is NA. Okay, so now I've just got a circle. So what am I going to do with the circle? Okay, well, how about I just copy it? Control C, Control V to paste it, and then I'll just put it right here. Then I will copy and paste again, Control C, Control V. I'll move it over here, and then Control C, Control V, and I'll move it here. So now you can imagine an A in between these items. So now it's just a matter of me copying this circle and just making, by using Control C and Control V, I'm just making an A. Okay, so I've got my A now created out of a bunch of circles. Now I can make this all one big item, because if I hit Control A, for example, which selects it, you can see it's all individual, and you may want to keep it like that, but I want to make it one item, and I want to make it one vector. And so I'm going to go up to Path, and I'm going to go to Union, and that's going to make this all one item. So now I can move this around as if it was one item. That's nice and easy there. And then I can click Edit Paths by Node, which is the second item down in the menu. And I can see this is an actual vector. I've actually got vector points on it. If I scroll in, you can see it a bit better. There's actual vector points on this. And it's like a bubbly A. So now I would simply save this as a vector. I'd go File, Save As, and then it would come up with file name drawing, save as type Inkscape SVG. That's what I want. And then I would select my appropriate letter here. I've done a font already, so this is why you can see a bunch of vectors, but I would select A, for example, and I would save it. And then that would be my A vector. It's an individual glyph that I've created using shapes. Now these don't have to be circles. You could create with the little rectangle button as well. So the third one down on the left-hand side, the menu item says create rectangles and squares. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to just create a rectangle, just like that. Now I can move this thing around, and I can make it fatter just by clicking on this and stretching it. I can make it thinner. I can also move it diagonally, and I can make it whatever size I want. So let's say I do this, and then I move it around. And now if I click it a second time, I can rotate it. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make it look like this. I'll click it, and I'll do Control C, Control V. That's going to copy it. And then from here, I could change it to make it look this size. And again, I'm going really quick here. Obviously, you could fine-tune it a lot better than what I'm doing. Lock it in, and then I could draw another rectangle and it could be here, for example, and I could say that's going to be my A, for example. Now I'm going to do Control A, and that's going to select all of it, and then I would go to Path Union, and that's going to make it all one object. When I click the little Edit Paths by Node, we can see now I've got nodes in there. This is one vector. So you can create a pretty good looking A or B or X or whatever you want to do using this. Now you can curve these if you wanted to as well. Simply click the Edit Paths by Node on the left-hand side, go in, and you can click in between any two nodes, and you can curve them as well. So using shapes, you can actually get really good looking fonts. You know, it takes a little bit of time, obviously. You know, it is a skill like anything else, but you can create pretty good looking letters using only squares, rectangles, circles, and any of the other shapes that are available in Inkscape as well. The third one is to use an existing font and modify the font. And this one's really nice. Now, I typically use public domain fonts, and then I'll monkey around with them, and I'll change the way they look. And that way I don't worry about violating anybody's copyright or trademark or anything like that. And there's tons of public domain fonts out there, but you can really tweak them and make them look pretty amazing. Okay, so I'm in Inkscape. So on the left-hand side, there are little menu icons, and I'm going to be using this one here that is called Create and Edit Text Objects. So I'm going to create the first glyph, and I'm just going to create the letter A, for example. So I'm going to use an existing font. So I'm going to click the little A, and then I'm going to click in my little palette somewhere. It doesn't really matter where you click because we're saving this as a vector file anyway. So I'm just going to click. Now I've got my font already set to be a public domain font called Bebas, and it's 500. You can see that on the top left-hand side. And then I'm going to type in the letter A. So that's going to be my base that I'm going to be using to create my font. Now from here, I can actually modify this font. I could stretch it out. I could make it, I'll just undo that. I could also stretch it out this way as well. I'm just hitting Control Z, by the way, or Control Z to undo it. But what I want to do is actually create this, make this into a vector, and then I can modify it and I can curve it, and that's going to be my object here. So what I'm going to do is click on this little Edit Paths by Node button on the left-hand side. It's the second one down, and you'll see that there are no nodes on this font. There's just this one little button right on the bottom left-hand side and then right there on the bottom right, but there's no actual nodes. And that's because this is not yet a vector. So if you're trying to monkey around with fonts in Inkscape and you can't, you need to do one very important thing first. This is an object. So I'm going to click on it, make it look like an object. It's got the little arrows out. And now I'm going to go Path, Object to Path. I'm creating this into a path now. Now when I create the Edit Paths by Node, and I click on it, you'll see there's now nodes. Nodes here, 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 they're all over the place. So now I can click on a node and I can drag that out and I can make it anything I want because it's now a vector. So I'm going to make these little nodes come out like this just by clicking on the node. Now you can also click in between the nodes as well. And so when you click inside, you can actually curve these as well. Because what I'm doing is I'm actually just talking between the two nodes and I'm making these vectors, these individual nodes, talk to each other. So I'm going to now stretch this. So you can make it look really neat by stretching this out. So you could make it look all crazy looking. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the way this looks. I'll simply click on the top left again, which is the little arrow. Here's my font now if I wanted to move it around. But now I'm just going to save this as an SVG file. I'm just going to go File, Save As, and it will save as an SVG file. Okay, so it took me about an hour, but I've got my 0 through 9, my A through Z. I didn't bother with the special characters for this walkthrough, but if I was making a font for sale, I would include special characters like exclamation marks, hashtag sign, which is the number sign, commas, that kind of thing. The more special characters you can put in, of course, the more saleable your font would be, and that's a good thing. I can simply double click on one of these, and because it's a vector, it will just open up as an infinitely scalable graphic. So there's my 0, for example, that I made. I can click on another one like a K, for example. There's my K that I made, and I can see they're looking pretty good. So these are all just SVG files, and I just have a folder full of SVG files. Now you could just zip this folder and sell it as an SVG folder if you have individual letters, and that's what you're selling, or would be individual graphics. And this is really good for monogrammed fonts. So this S, for example, would only be used for a Cricut machine or a digital cutting machine. They wouldn't be putting together an entire word probably. So the individual letters, you can sell those as individual SVGs in a bundle as well. But if you want to sell this as an actual workable font, that's what I'm going to show you next. So I've created these individual glyphs, and now I'm going to make them into a font, and I'm going to name the font Zen Wiggle. That's going to be the name of my font. And I'm going to be using an online program that's free and very easy to use, and I'm going to jump into it right now. So there are lots of online font creator tools. And so I'm not saying this is the best one. I'm not saying this is the only one. I'm saying this is my favorite one. The one that I use is called glyfter.com. It's completely free. And what I really like is it's very easy to use. I just like easy. So what you do is you see these little squares here. It says A, B, C, D, E, and it just goes on and on. There's all your capital letters. As I scroll down, you'll see there's all your small or lowercase letters. As I continue to scroll, you'll see there's numbers 1 through 9. And then there's your special characters, exclamation mark, percentage points, open parentheses, close parentheses, square brackets, and so on. And so I'm going to go right to the top, and I'm simply going to click on the first one, which is A, top left. And when I click on it, it opens up, and I can now just select my SVG file that I created. So I'm going to double click on this A, or I'm going to click open. I can double click it or click open. I'll double click it. And now the A pops into the little window, and you're done. That's the A glyph has now been identified as that SVG file. I'll click on B, and I'll double click B. Click on C, double click C. And it just goes on and on. Now you can edit these as well. If I click the little pencil button, which is in the lower right on any one of these, a little window pops up where you can edit it, you can rotate it, and there's like very, very elementary editing tools here. But if you don't want to use that, you just continue on. I don't typically use this a whole lot. If you click this little X, it'll ask you if you want to delete a path, so you don't really want to do that. So this just kind of stays open now. You can click the little 3 hamburger button there and you can open it up. It's also on the right hand side. You can click it and these little icons open up. So if you wanted to add an icon in as a special character down on the very bottom, so for example, like there's these fonts called dingbats, and you could have special characters in here. So right down at the bottom, I'm going to select this little line button here, but I'm going to insert a grid, insert an icon instead. So I'm going to take my little magnifying glass and just drag it over. So you could insert special characters if you wanted into some of these as well. You don't have to have it be a bracket just because it says it's a bracket. Now, again, you may want to do this, you may not want to do this, but that is a nice feature. You could create a whole font just with icons in here as well. I'm going to go up to the top here and just finish this out. Okay, so I have my glyphs all entered in. I've got all of my capital letters entered. And then you'll see I've got my small letters or my lower cap letters all blank. I didn't do anything with that. And then I've got my 0 through 9 in here as well. Now, if you want to get rid of these special characters, you simply click on the little top right of the square. There's a little X button there, and they just disappear. So I'm not going to have any special characters for this walkthrough. So I'm ready to go. Now this untitled font is here on the top left. I'm just going to click this, and I'm going to name my font something that is my unique identifier. So I'm going to call it Zen Wiggle. And then from here, I'm going to click this font button, which is located right at the top. And I'm going to click the down arrow button. And it's going to say, you need to sign up, but then you can download the actual font. So I'm just going to log in now and I can download the font. I do want to point out as well, you can also just download. It's grayed out, so you may think you have to sign up, but you could just download the font as well. I do want to point out this is an online tool, so if you lose your internet connection or if you're stuck on an airplane or something, you may not be able to use Glyphter. You do need to be connected to the internet in order to use this. But I'm just going to click the just download button, and we can see now it's given me a zip file. It's Glyphter font zip, and I'm simply going to save that now to my Windows folder. So here's my Zen Wiggle folder with all of my individual glyphs, and then I've got my folder here, which is my output file, Glyphter font. I'm going to double click on the file folder, the zip file. That will open it up, and I can see here there's 2 folders. One is a CCS folder and one is a fonts folder. I'm going to double click on the fonts folder, and that's going to give me my W0FF file, my EOT file, my true type font file. Okay, so I've taken the contents of the zip folder and I've extracted them out into a regular file folder. And I'm just going to make this a little easier to see here. And we can see we've got this folder file right here, and it says true type font file. That's what I want. If you do view details, you can actually see the extensions here a little bit. This one says true type font file. That's your font file. So when I double click it, it's going to try to install this now, like an actual font. Now you'll notice my lowercase letters are all just defaulted because I didn't input anything in for the glyphs. But my higher ones, the ones that are the numbers and the capitals, those show up, and you can see them here at the top. All of my capital letters are the ones that I created. All of my numbers are the ones that I created, and the rest were just input with regular default. So I'm going to click the install button, and that will actually install the font. And now I'll just close this out, and I'll actually pop open Word, and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, so I'm in Word right now, and my default font is Calibri 11, and I'm just going to type in some, like a sentence here, like my name, and it's got capital letters and it's got smaller letters. I'll just make the font a bit bigger so we can see it. And now I'm going to change my font to that Zen Wiggle. So I'm going to select in Word my font, and I'm going to scroll on down, and I've got so many fonts. I feel like I'm on an episode of Hoarders here, but I'm going to scroll on down and I'm going to see if my Zen Wiggle is there, and there it is at the bottom. So now I'm going to click on it and we can see my font actually shows up. Now the default, the lowercase letters, remember I didn't create those. So that's just a default for whatever program you're using. But if I make it all uppercase, there is my font now that I've got, and I can make it larger or smaller so it'll fit. So there's my actual font now that I've created, and we can see it looks pretty nice. And again, I'll get rid of this lowercase. I'll just make this all uppercase. And we can see now my Zen water cooler font lives and breathes inside of Word. So you can sell that one file, that TTF file, as an actual font. You could list it on Creative Fabrica, for example. You could list it on Etsy. You could list it on any marketplace that sells digital downloads. So I hope you found this walkthrough helpful. It is a basic walkthrough for complete beginners. So I do want to point out there's lots of different ways you can make the glyphs. Handwritten, you can have great graphic design skills using Inkscape, using Illustrator, using Photoshop, all sorts of different ways. But this is the actual nuts and bolts mechanics on how you get the glyphs into a TTF file easily, so that you could sell it online, so somebody who's not computer savvy could install the font and then use it in a Word document or a digital cutting machine or any Windows-based program. Thanks a lot for watching, and if you want to take your graphic design skills to the next level, check out this video.